I think that's the president's decision, but I'm sure that Osama bin Laden is no longer walking the earth, as President Obama has said.
Would you have released a photograph?
I don't know. I'd look at the various parameters and decide, but I think the important thing is that the world's most dangerous terrorist, the man who's responsible for the death of thousands of civilians, has been eliminated. I have no doubt that that has happened.
A lot of killing of civilians going on at the moment in Syria. What is your view on whether the regime will crack?
I don't think you can sustain the slaughter of civilians. I think it's morally wrong, and I think it's something that people can't accept. I think there's a good chance this regime will fray, and it certainly cannot be allowed to continue the butchering of its citizens, which is what is happening.
It seems that the amount of demonstrators on the streets are not enough. It's not critical mass. It would have to be some sort of coup. Are there any signs of that Israeli intelligence picks up?
Well, you'd have to let events roll out, but Syria is a minority government of Alawites, controlling over 90% of the population that is not Alawite. How that translates in the military remains to be seen, but one thing is clear: when you have tanks and armored personnel carriers and machine guns firing into civilians, something is deeply, deeply wrong. This is a dysfunctional society. It can't go on like this.
Should the leader go?
Should stop. Whether he goes or not, these are things that will become clear, I think, in the unfolding days and weeks ahead.
Well, the British made it clear in a speech last night that there's now going to be mounting international pressure on Syria. We've seen it happen in Tunisia and Libya and Egypt, where it starts with demands for things to stop and it ends with calls for the overthrow of the government. Would you add your voice to saying that Assad should stand down?
I add my voice and the voice of every citizen of Israel that says that this slaughter must stop now. There are various means of achieving the end to slaughter. The important thing is that it stops. As far as what we'd like to see in Syria, we'd like to see in every one of our borders neighbors who are committed to peace with us and also to peace with their own people. Stop butchering your people, make peace with Israel. Go for a broader peace, institute reforms, have democracy, have real countries. In this whole area between the Himalayas and the Atlantic, there are hundreds of millions of people who live in dysfunctional societies. The 20th century has passed them by. Now, because of the internet and because of TV, they can see what they've missed out on, and they all want a different life. The only place in that vast area in which you have stability, prosperity, democracy is my country, Israel. It's the only place where you have Muslim Arabs, about over 1 million Arab citizens of Israel, who enjoy equal rights under the law. It's the only place. So, I would like to see, I'll tell you what I'd like to see. I'd like to see Israel be able to say, for once, we're not the only democracy in the Middle East. There's another one, and another one, and another one. If we had that, that would be great. I'd love to see that in Syria and everywhere else.
Well, people say that you're not going to see that with Palestine because at the moment there can't be a connected Palestinian state which you would accept. There's been this agreement in Egypt, Fatah and Hamas coming together. You now have a single entity with which you could negotiate, but you're still refusing to do so. Why?
Well, if we had a unity in the Palestinian society...
They signed it yesterday.
If we had unity for peace, I would applaud it. But in fact, we have unity away from peace. This is a pact between the Palestinian Authority, between Fatah and Hamas, that just praised Osama bin Laden, that just condemned President Obama for taking out Osama bin Laden. That is Hamas that calls for Israel's destruction, that fires rockets on our cities, that just tried a few days ago to fire a rocket into a school bus full of kids. What is this? Indeed, they actually fired this rocket and killed one boy. This is an organization committed to our destruction. You can only make peace with an enemy that wants peace. An enemy that continues to seek your destruction is not a partner for peace. We're looking for a peace partner.
Well, your critics would say that your policies, which they say are intransigent, have pushed Fatah into the arms of Hamas, because you and Fatah were not negotiating. The settlements were continuing to being built. After a year and a half of it, they decided, well, it's more important for us to get unity with our Palestinian brothers in Hamas because you're not negotiating.
Well, actually, I called on the Palestinian Authority to negotiate on day one. On day two, I lifted hundreds of roadblocks and checkpoints so that their economy could...
You kept building the settlements.
And the rate of construction is probably the lowest. I actually did a freeze on settlement construction, something no government has done in the last 18 years.
Well, why have they got back into bed with an organization that fires rockets at you?
It's a good question, because on day one they refused my call to resume negotiations. I'm talking about the Palestinian Authority. They continue to teach in their textbooks and to preach in their schools the elimination of Israel. That's what's happening internally.
But they're going to come straight back at you, Prime Minister, and say, yeah, and you continue to build the separation barrier, there are settlements being built, you're not really negotiating how to withdraw at least some of those settlements, and after a year and a half of, this is the perspective, them trying, they've realised that the more important is to get unity with Hamas, declare a Palestinian state, which, as you know, many people at the United Nations will back and support, and it will become a de facto political reality.
Well, there are two assumptions in what you say. The first is that because there's some construction in the settlements, that prevents peace. It didn't prevent peace in the achievement of peace with Egypt or Jordan or the agreements that I myself signed with the Palestinians.
It doesn't show goodwill, though.
In fact, the settlements take up about 1% to 2% of the entire area of Judea, Samaria, the West Bank. That's it. And the addition of a few houses there is an infinitesimal addition, so it doesn't make any difference. I think it's an issue that has to be dealt with, but the only way you're going to deal with it is to have negotiation. And look, we recognize that in our ancestral homeland, the home of the Jewish people for the last 4,000 years, another people lives, the Palestinians. We live there, they live there. We'll have to have an agreement. But the only way you're going to reach an agreement is to negotiate. And the second question is, who do you negotiate with? We negotiate with people who are committed to peace, to a two-state solution, a state for the Palestinians, a state for the Jewish people. That's what we thought we had. Now, 2 days ago, we've had a major setback in this agreement that has been signed yesterday in Cairo, because instead of standing clearly against Hamas and for peace, the Palestinian Authority embraced those people who want to wipe Israel off the face of the earth, have said so after the signing, praise bin Laden to the gills, and are absolutely committed to terrorism. That's not the way to move towards peace. We remain committed to negotiating a real solution of peace with those of our neighbors who want peace.
Talk about neighbours. The UN thing will play out this autumn, and yes, some will support the statehood and some won't. Talk about neighbours. What has happened in Egypt, it seems, since Mubarak has left, that the passage between Gaza and Egypt is now much more porous. You don't know what's going to happen in Egypt in the future. These elections could throw up anything. Isn't it true that Israel is actually very nervous about what has gone on in the whole region? I would argue especially with Egypt and this long border you have with it, with the peace agreement you have with it, the fact that Hamas is related to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, etc., etc. And you, Israel, are almost powerless to shape the events which are playing out this year.
Look, the peace between Israel and Egypt has been the anchor of peace in the entire Middle East, the anchor of peace and stability. It held up for 30 years, and it was remarkably important.
But this border doesn't worry you?
And what is happening now is of some concern, I have to tell you. I remember when there was no peace. You know, I nearly drowned in a firefight in the Suez Canal, and they're still looking for the idiot who pulled me out of the water, with a 20-kilo ammunition pack on my back. I remember what it was like. A lot of my friends died there. I nearly died there. It just changed the world when we had peace. It gave us the ability, both Egypt and Israel, to build up our respective countries. It wasn't the kind of warm peace that I had envisioned and would have wanted, but it was a cold peace is better than a hot war. Now we're seeing the fraying, possibility of the fraying of this historic anchor of peace, and naturally we're concerned. I think what the international community has to say to the Egyptian people and to any Egyptian government, keep the peace. Stand firm behind the peace. Don't allow Hamas, that borders on Egypt, Gaza, controlled by Hamas in Iran, that borders on Egypt, don't let them smuggle in weapons and rockets, because that will explode the peace. And I hope that the Egyptians follow through on that.
I have to press you on the border. If the smuggling continues, Hamas will be much better armed and you will be in a very difficult place. Why is it that with the army in full control now of Egypt, is the crossing between and the borders between Gaza and Egypt now more open? Is it the army that's behind this?
Well, there was a very firm Egyptian policy to try to block the smuggling of Iranian weapons through Egypt into the Gaza Strip, into Hamas hands. I would like to see that continue. I'm not sure that that resolution, that determination to prevent the smuggling of Iranian arms to Gaza is holding up. But that should be part of any arrangement between Israel and Egypt, and that's the foundation of peace. You can't have peace if you let Iran bring in rockets, thousands of which are fired into Israel from Gaza. And I hope Egypt sticks to that point. I think that this explains also why it is that we insist, that I insist, that we have solid security arrangements in any future Palestinian state, because Iran would try to bring in stuff to the West Bank. So we need a real demilitarization arrangement, especially along the Jordan River, so that what happens in Gaza doesn't happen on the other side, in the West Bank, in Judea, Samaria. And I think that's one of the two pillars of peace. The first is that we ask our Palestinian partners, recognize the Jewish state of Israel. You ask us to recognize a state for the Palestinians, recognize a state for the Jewish people. They don't want to do that. And yesterday they went back, embracing the fans of bin Laden, Hamas. The second is, even if you do that, we still need very strong security arrangements so that we can prevent the smuggling of weapons into West Bank Palestinian states in order to prevent a replication of what is happening in Gaza. Mutual recognition and security arrangements for Israel, that's the key to peace. It's a demilitarized Palestinian state that recognizes the Jewish state of Israel. That's the formula for peace. We're ready to embrace it. I hope the Palestinians have second thoughts and go back to the path of peace.